I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. It's June 17th, 2025. The state of Maryland's first bond issue after Moody's rating agency downgraded the state's debt in the spring comes in better than expected. In Washington, D.C., Tommy Wells, the former city council member and former director of the D.C. Department of Energy and Environment, gets into the fight to claw back environmental spending cuts proposed by the mayor. MCPS has new grading regulations, and the student member of the Board of Education, Pranil Savarna, is not happy. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. The songs we use in this episode are instrumental versions of songs they wrote for their latest album, Everything is Normal. You can find where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. This spring, as the state of Maryland was dealing with news that the Trump administration's policies on federal worker layoffs and budget cuts was going to have severe consequences for state finances, Moody's, one of the top two credit rating agencies, downgraded the state's debt from AAA to the next level below, called AA1. This was the first time Maryland lost its AAA bond rating in 50 years. The state's leadership, the governor, the comptroller, the treasurer, the Speaker of the House, and the president of the state Senate came together to decry what they called to be a Trump downgrade. Moody's also downgraded federal government debt. Credit ratings determine the interest costs of debt taken by borrowers, and the fall from AAA standing was seen as ominous. The state's Department of Legislative Services estimated interest rates to rise to 5%, up from 3.37% last year. But then Standard & Poor's, the other major credit rating agency, came back with a solid AAA. Fitch, a third and a much smaller credit rating agency, also came back with their version of AAA. Last week, the state of Maryland issued its first general obligation bonds, new borrowings, under the divided credit rating period. The cost of the borrowings rose marginally from 3.37% last year to 3.55% this year. The interest cost increase works out to be around $3 million on $1.6 billion borrowed. The state will issue more bonds during the year. After authorizing the state bond sale, here is what Governor Westmore had to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Treasurer. Congratulations to you and your team on another successful bond sale. Yes, the state did very well. There's no reason for us to be moody today.
Why didn't I think of that?
In Washington, D.C., Tommy Wells is an institution, a former council member and retired director of the Department of Energy and Environment. He fashioned D.C.'s climate action. Last week, he was in front of the city council criticizing Mayor Muriel Bowser's 2026 budget, which makes deep cuts to projects that are part of his legacy. I caught up with him this week to weigh in.
Local taxpayers, from income tax, property tax, and such, that does not fund the DOEE except for a small portion. DOEE is funded through surcharges on power bills to be reinvested in energy efficiency, fees on stormwater to be reinvested in mitigating the impact of stormwater carrying pollution to our rivers, and permits and such for doing work in the environment and releasing pollution and such, or trying not to. So what the budget does is it looks at that 80 to 85% and says, you know what, we're going to take that as if it's local tax revenue. We're going to start dipping into that money to pay our own power bills, not reinvest in energy efficiency or green power or renewable energy. As we told everyone, you're going to pay a higher power bill, but it's going to be reinvested in reducing energy use. Instead, the mayor's budget takes it and says, no, we're just going to use it to pay our power bills, not even use it to be more energy efficient in government buildings or to add more solar to government buildings, add more renewables. It just says, no, we're going to pay our power bills with the money that was supposed to be reinvested in green power.
Can I ask you, are there any constraints on the mayor in this respect, or the mayor has complete autonomy as to how she shifts the money from what is a special purpose tax to a general taxation?
She has to change the law to do it, and the council has to agree to it. And so it's going to be difficult because she funded a lot of council priorities and other things that are important with the environmental dollars, just cashed them out. And it dismantles the investments that makes a strong Department of Energy and Environment that's responsible and accountable to the residents that pay our bills. She did two other things with the Budget Support Act that we oppose. One is she says any unspent funds from these dollars, we don't want to come through to the council anymore. We want just to assume that it goes into general revenue. Well, let me tell you, a lot of those funds pay for multi-year contracts. Or, it's hard to spend the money exactly according to the fiscal year because a number of those funds come in at the end of the fiscal year. So they'll be unspent. And that's why the chief financial officer certified said, oh, yeah, you're going to get revenue out of this. The second way she wants to change the law is she wants to tell the private building owners in Washington, D.C., you don't really have to meet the building energy performance standards anymore, at least for another 5 or 6 years or so. That really, it has no impact on DC budget. It's just slipped in there on behalf of the building owners. And I tell you, the city is retrofitting itself because of the pandemic and not as many people downtown. Now's the time they're reinvesting in their buildings to say you can do it more cheaply and not have to be so energy efficient. We're going to have to live with that for a long time. It's really sacrificing the future of the people that come after us around climate change. We really think it undermines the relationship the council has to the public, that if the council passes these laws that says, we're going to charge you more for your power, that we're going to reinvest in a green bank for investment and in energy retrofits and green power, and then the mayor comes and says, no, we're going to take that money for something else. That really undermines the legitimacy of our council.
The mayor faces some very difficult choices. Obviously, the economy is not doing that well. She's constrained by Congress with respect to the money she can spend. Where do you think the balance is for her?
I'm not sure, but I know that when the mayor needed $500 million of capital dollars, she got it for the downtown, sports arena. When it's a priority, we make things happen. $1 billion being generated for a football stadium.
But that's bonds, right?
That's borrowing money that's paid for by operating dollars, cutting the Department of Energy and Environment budget by a quarter, by about 25% of its budget being used for the rest of the city. It just says climate mitigation, green investments, the green economy. You have to understand how many small businesses are funded with those green dollars to retrofit buildings, to install solar. it's a pipeline for not only local businesses, but for local jobs of people. It's a low entry level of job to do building energy performance measures, and to do like energy audits, and to install solar and such. It's a great entry level. And even cleaning up the bioswales, those green areas that are along the roads that absorb water, they become trash pits unless you keep them clean. These are low-skilled jobs for DC residents getting back into the workforce and get a history, a good job history. So undercutting that and saying, no, we're going to invest more money into buildings downtown and in other things is why I testified against the budget. I said wrong priorities. We need to build for the next 50 years and not build trying to recreate the last 50 years.
Do you have any suggestions for her as to where she should look for that money that she is trying to raise to balance the books?
The mayor put $5 million for new investments downtown. $5 million needs to go back to DOEE. She moved $13 million over to Department of Public Works from DOEE. I think that there's things DOEE can do with that $13 million that's similar to the purpose that she put in DPW. I think there's a number of areas where they took DOEE funds and repurposed them. The fact that they're not even the retrofits needed for the DC buildings to save energy, but instead just paying the full bill with DOEE money. I mean, we could have been working on this for the past 5 to 10 years. That will remain until you invest, and that can be capital dollars. $500 million to a place downtown, the arena, $1 billion to the stadium. Some of that money could go into retrofitting. It's about $250 million to do it, but retrofit DC buildings so you don't pay these high power bills, and then you're good moving forward. That's clearly that frees up a lot of operating dollars if you're not paying, anywhere from around, 500, $80 to $90 million a year on a power bill. Let's cut that in half with, with retrofitting our government buildings. But no, that money is going to go to, other capital, projects. So yeah. Save on your power bills. That makes more money available. And then also bring some of the monies that were repurposed elsewhere in the name of the new economy or the future of DC. Bring it back, put it in DOEE, and continue to fund the green economy.
Do you also oppose the way in which the RFK Stadium redevelopment is being structured?
The city faces, according to the chief financial officer, a loss of $1 billion out of our operating revenue per year over the next 4 years because of the number of layoffs from the federal government that were funded by income tax, property tax, and sales tax. Income tax is the biggest chunk. And so that many higher wage income earners being laid off means that we're going to lose a lot of revenue. I don't know if this is the time to invest in a football stadium. The revenue that's being generated around the football stadium, it's going to be captured by the owners.
Let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. What is the mayor offering the council so that the council will actually vote with her?
I think the mayor has tapped into the nostalgia of having a championship football team, that they want to see the Commanders back in DC. It'll be almost impossible to oppose the football stadium for elected officials.
Tommy Wells, thank you.
You're welcome.
Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland has issued new grading regulations, among them the return of final exams, limited retakes, and not for final exams, the averaging of grades across marking periods rather than going with the highest score. Pranil Savarna, the now outgoing student member of the Board of Education, is not happy.
The shift from what was originally planned to be a rollout starting in 9th grade to a midstream rollout for all students next year really concerns me, because say I'm a junior right now, and all of my friends took AP World History this year, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a different course this year. I'm going to take AP World History next year. And now I could have the same exact scores on every single assignment in that class and get a different grade than them. These are my peers I'm being compared to if I take it the next year, because the grading policy is shifted from year to year. And then the mandatory minimum now is only 2 retakes per class per quarter. What does that look like in terms of how we're making sure that our students are willing to put their effort forward and willing to go back and say, well, I didn't understand this. I'm going to go back and retake it. The final concern is going back to a really test-heavy environment, assessment-heavy environment, which we started to shift away from starting in 2016. And then the impact that a midstream grading change will have on things like scholarships, college applications. I mean, no matter how much you try to tell colleges that this is the difference, the real kind of truth behind everything is that every single student is getting A's nowadays. And if you're not getting an A, right, well, sorry, but you're kind of, for lack of a better word, cooked, right, for your college applications and for scholarships, because a lot of them are GPA dependent, which is also part of the reason why we see a lot of this grade inflation, especially at the top end of the grading scale.
Can you explain what they're doing with grade inflation? How are they knocking it down?
The semester grading averages are now being done based on the averages of the marking periods, right? And then you also have for specific subjects, which still hasn't been released, a end of course assessment or district-wide summative assessment, right? Which is worth 10% of the grade. One thing that I would like to see is this means that a student who gets an 89% both quarters, they're lumped in with the same students who get an 81. So I would like to see A minuses, A pluses, B minuses, B pluses. And then the other thing that I would like to see out of a grading regulation would be standardization across classes. This was the biggest piece of feedback that students gave, by and large, when having input on this regulation.
What do you mean standardization?
Okay, so
how do you standardize physics and French?
Okay, I'm saying standardization between classes, the same class at different schools, right, or the same class at the same school, right. So if I'm taking, for example, AP Government, right, at one school. Of course, we want to have some level of teacher autonomy, but I should also be able to go between teacher and teacher in that school and have a certain understanding of the curriculum and be able to move very smoothly between those classes. And then also be able to be judged with my peers across the district in a very similar standard. So one thing that we were looking for was, a big thing was the standardization of syllabi. Another thing that students wanted, which they said, having all of the assessment days takes away from our learning.
Pranil Suvarna, thank you and good luck next year.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for the time.
Last weekend's military parade in Washington, D.C. was ostensibly meant to celebrate the U.S. Army's 250th birthday. It also happened to coincide with President Trump's own 79th birthday. Trump has in the past said he wanted a grand military parade like other countries, France, Russia, China. They all have grand displays of military equipment and sharply marching soldiers. While U.S. military branches do participate regularly in sporting events and provide color guards in July 4th parades, rolling tanks down Constitution Avenue is not what they normally do. Tens of thousands, possibly 100,000, likely showed up to see the spectacle, though Trump officials have claimed larger numbers. Social media coverage of the event mentioned poor crowd control, empty bleachers, as well as enthusiasm from Trump supporters. Meanwhile, across the country, and especially in the Washington, D.C. region, larger crowds gathered against Trump in what was billed as the No Kings protests. This is also a local media story. What you might have missed is the deliberate false equivalency to the exact column inch of the parade and the No Kings protests in the city's newspaper of record, The Washington Post. If you got a hard copy of the paper this Sunday, the front page has 4 columns, each with 14 inches of perfectly balanced coverage of the parade and the protests. Even the 2 pictures were the exact same size. Pages A12 and A13 similarly were pictures, A12 for the parade, A13 for the protest. The stories followed on A14, with the top half given to a story finely balanced between the two sides. The bottom of the page looked at the history of Trump's involvement and desire for a grand military parade. And then the top half of A15 is about the No Kings protests. Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos may say that this is fair and balanced, but the false equivalence is in part a big problem of American politics, where inaction on gun control and abortion, and education and the environment are political victims of both siding. A failure of how we aggregate political preferences in the country. The opinion pages of the Washington Post have already drifted rightward, and now concern that the news coverage is headed in the same direction seems to be coming to fruition. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synthesizers and percussion. The songs we use in this episode are instrumental versions of songs they wrote for their latest album, Everything is Normal. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.